What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 3 of ClassiCast. I'm Esfand. I'm here with Tips Out. I'm here with Stay Safe. And today we're going to talk about how much vanilla WoW changed within the scope of the game itself. No WoW expansion has had as many content patches put out as vanilla WoW did. And there's really good reason for that. So I think the best way to start with that is going to be talking about patch 1.1. Stay Safe. Do you want to get us started with that?
Yeah, so hey, I see a lot of people, I guess, refer to the first patch of Vanilla WoW being patch 1.0. It was actually patch 1.1. 1.0 was a beta patch. I also want to kind of throw this out. When Vanilla WoW came out, when WoW first came out, it wasn't sort of an immediate hit. It launched Q1 of 2005 with under 2 million players. It had about 1.5 million players, which I just looked it up. I thought it was really interesting. So it really... it came out, people saw it was a really good game, and it absolutely blew up to, it peaked at 12 million players at one point. So it actually blew up after that.
I think maybe a big part of that too might have been the game did release in November, late November, November 23rd, actually, of that year of 2004. And then maybe after Christmas, you kind of had that surge come through, right?
Yeah, maybe people were just too busy to play it when it came out, with holiday stuff.
Yeah, and actually on that release, I mean, the game had been in development for about 3 years. Where it had been announced 3 years prior to its release. So how long has it been in development? I think it was. I think they started development slightly or shortly before that. But as far as the alpha phases and the beta phases, there's so much that was implemented in the game originally that they flipped either throughout the time of the betas or the alphas, or right before release. And namely one of those things is Paladin. A lot of people talk about that all the time. Like, they basically put out a big Paladin rework right before release. They got rid of their strikes. They changed it to the seal and judge system. I know, Tips, you were saying that they made some changes to warriors too right off the bat.
Yeah, in patch 1.1, they actually changed the entire threat system. They increased the coefficient, how much you generate threat, generally speaking, from all abilities across the board. And Taunt, believe it or not, was actually off the global cooldown, or I'm sorry, on the global cooldown.
Oh.
And it cost rage. So they actually removed that. And they've done that to warriors over the course of the years as well. They did that to pummel. They did that to hamstring. Those abilities are now off the global cooldown as well, and they don't cost rage anymore. But that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So from the get-go, it seemed like things were going in the direction of maybe we need to simplify the game just a little bit. And if we were to sit down and talk to you guys about every single change that occurred from 1.1 to 1.12, we would probably be here for like a day or two.
Yeah.
So we're definitely just going to highlight some of the main things. We're going to go over the class reworks, and we're going to touch on the big content patches as well. So hope you guys enjoy, and I think Stay Safe. You can take it away, man.
Well, yeah, before we leave 1.1, I want to say one big thing that people sort of gossip about, but changing between beta and 1.1 was plains running with Taurens. Remember, Taurens couldn't ride mounts. They like ran super fast across the plains of Mulgore. How funny was that?
Well, I think something that's interesting about that as well is, I mean, just take the game, right? It's an RPG, MMORPG, role-playing game, and you could see that in their class design. I mean, the entirety of the game is based about, like, does this make sense? Does it make sense that this class can do this? Does it make sense that this race can do this, right? So with Taurens having plains running, yeah, I mean, it's RP, right? It makes sense in the RP fashion to, I think it was you run in one direction for 10 seconds, right? You run in one direction for 10 seconds, and after 10 seconds, your speed ramps up and your mount speed kicks in. But as soon as you stop running, you lose your mount speed. And then you didn't have an option to get on a mount because supposedly nothing could actually hold your weight as a Tauren. That was the role play behind it.
Yeah, you're too big.
Yeah. And then they eventually said, right on release, they were like, okay, this is impossible to balance because in PvP, there's one instance of it where, yeah, you can like run circles around everybody, right? And then there's the other instance where it's like as soon as I get CC'd or stunned or slowed, like I can't get on a mount for 10 seconds while everybody else can get on it for 3 seconds. So it just gets to the point where it's not even possible to balance, but kind of hilarious. Like, I couldn't imagine. I mean, just imagine if you're in a dungeon and you're running to the next pack, and then all of a sudden your speed kicks in. You just, I don't know. I think it would have been hilarious, but they changed that.
The solution was Kodos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah,
But anyway, patch 1.2, you want to talk about it?
yeah. With 1.2, I know. Well,
So they added Gurbashi Arena,
mhm,
right? Mordon was added.
mhm.
Mordon was not there at the start. Neither was the Gurbashi Arena. And this is when they had the first holiday event ever in the game. It was the first Feast of Wintervale, right? Which started the long tradition of they kept adding more and more holiday events. Even to this day, they add new ones.
Yeah, yeah. And I think something that's interesting about Mordon, and I think a lot of people don't know. I personally did not know this. I don't remember Mordon not being in the game because one, I didn't do all the dungeons leveling up. And I mean, I was what? I was like 13, 14 at the time, I think. And I just didn't do all the dungeons leveling up. But Mordon had. It's funny the long term implications of having Mordon in the game, like the items that you get from there. You know, talking about Blackstone Ring. That's the pre-BIS for the melee for people like myself and Tips, right? That's one of the pre-BIS rings prior to some of the stuff that gets added on later in like the AV patch and so on. But there's gear in there. There's nature resist gear in there for AQ40. So there's a lot of stuff in there that ends up getting used later on. But other than that, from my understanding, that patch and really the first couple of patches, it was a lot of bug fixes. Right, early on, it's constant bug fixes, constant minor tweaks to the numbers. Again, we don't want to get into a lot of the real minute details, right? Just because I feel like
Bell
we're gonna.
coefficients and stuff. Yeah, I think we'd get bogged down. And like Tip said, it would take a day and a half to talk about all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Tips, you want
But
to add
you're right.
anything?
Moradon was huge. There's a bunch of pre-raid caster gear in there as well. That's a very big addition. A lot of people didn't realize that it wasn't out at launch because I think it came out like 2 months after launch, and
Well, a
people
lot of people weren't even 60
they
yet.
weren't able to do it yet. Yeah,
Mhm.
they were still too low level. It didn't impact them at all.
Mhm.
exactly. And by the way, if you're one of those people that wants to see a true 1-1 to 112 rerun, European players, you actually didn't start playing until patch 1.2.
That's all right.
So I guess Classic WoW will come out a month later for you guys. But yeah, generally speaking, 3-4 weeks after launch, a lot of bug fixes, a level 40-ish, 50-ish dungeon that a lot of people hadn't even reached yet. So Mardon is definitely one of those things that if it does release at launch, I think it won't matter too much to many people. It won't really change the game.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know also in that patch they fixed the Seal of the Crusader bug for paladins. I'm just gonna mention this because it hits close to home. You guys know this, all right? And Seal of Crusader was actually doing too much damage. So apparently paladins were doing too much damage at some point, right? And Blizzard thought that they had to fix it. I personally don't think it was really even that big of a deal because it still wouldn't have been as good as Seal Command. But I don't know. It's just something that people talk about often as far as paladins go. So just thought it'd be interesting to mention that was the patch that was fixed in. So,
No
Stacey, if
doubt.
you want to go with 1.3.
Let's do 1.3. So this patch added a lot. I think Blizzard early on realized that melee DPS warriors, rogues were outperforming casters, mages, and warlocks. When I say casters, I know that you have your Ellie shamans and boomkins, but okay, mages and warlocks, right? Sorry. They added a bunch of plus damage items for casters with the addition of Dire Maul. Dire Maul comes out, so you have Dire Maul, a bunch of new items, not just for casters, for melee DPS as well. Azure Ghosts and Kha'Zix come out, the first world bosses in WoW's history, and now you can actually teleport directly to Molten Core. You don't have to run through Blackrock Depths to get to Molten Core. You can talk to that Blood Elf guy in the window room right there and teleport directly there. So all very, very big changes with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt. I also wanted to add that that's whenever meeting stones were first added. So meeting stones that they weren't really very useful, right? Because and this is something that I actually found out about this recently because I never actually used a meeting stone. I never remember actually using the meeting stone. I just thought it was there as like a landmarker, right? As just like a hey, like let's meet at the meeting stone. But I never actually went and used it. And there was a queue system in the game in vanilla. And I know Tips was talking about that a little bit too earlier, like how ridiculous that was. Tips, if you wanna touch on that.
Yeah, so basically in 1.3, if you walked up to the meeting stone and you actually right-clicked it, it would put you in a queue with other players who had also done the same thing. They had walked up to the meeting stone, they had right-clicked it. Now, obviously, what's the big problem with this system? First and foremost, a lot of the meeting stones are actually located right next to the instance portals or very close to them. So you'd have to clear like waves of elite mobs that you wouldn't be able to do solo anyways. You would already have to be in a group in order to get to the meeting stone. So obviously there was a big problem with that. And at the same time, the requirement in general or the actual system itself was not very responsive. And it started off actually being very picky as to who could queue up into your group. And it wasn't until a certain amount of time had elapsed after you had queued up where the system would auto adjust and allow people. I think it would even start to allow DPS in lieu of tanks and healers
Yeah.
to queue up into your group.
Yep.
So definitely a very raw, a very unrefined system, to say the least.
But Vanilla WoW had Dungeon Finder. Wow, that's crazy. Man.
Yeah, man. Look at that, dude.
Yeah, it was hot garbage, but it existed. It existed.
Casual game.
Yeah. No, I mean it's just funny because like that's one of the things that we talk about a lot. People in the community talk about a lot, and it's the amount of the amount of community that was taken away from the game with the addition of Raid Finder, LFG, and I know I for one am very vocal about that, and I think everybody here agrees, right? It's funny that existed in some form, but people still disregarded it. People still didn't like to use it because really, like you said, you would have to be at the instance anyway. So maybe if you were questing in the area and you said, "Oh, let's go queue up for this thing and see what happens," right? Why not just instead of running all the way there, general chat, LFG, Scarlet Monastery, right? Well, I mean, that's kind of a bad example because that's a lower level zone. Yeah. But
I'm trying to think pragmatically how this would work. Okay, you'd run up, you'd touch the stone, you'd be in the queue, and then you'd go off and continue questing, and then a half hour later, it would find you a group. You'd be in a group now, and you'd all have to run back and go to the dungeon. Mm-hmm. That's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's go ahead, Tips. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like what Esfand just said, it would be a lot more convenient to just spam Ironforge or trade chat asking for a group. Because if you think about it, if you go, or the amount of people in a specific zone are pretty limited. And there's a lot more people at the auction house. There's a lot more people in capital cities. Why would you go from a capital city to a zone, right-click the stone, then go all the way back to the capital city to continue doing what you're doing instead of doing /2, LFG, so on and so forth. So it was kind of I don't want to say it was a convenience. It was for a very particular situation where there happened to be enough people in the zone who were happening to be questing in the area of that meeting stone. Those are really the only people that could benefit from the system, which is ultimately why I think it was changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think so. A couple other things that were added to the game in 1.3. We talked about the amount of plus damage items that were added in Dire Maul, which is huge for casters, like Stay Safe was saying. But they also, that's the patch where they added footlockers around the world for rogues to level up their lockpicking, which, talking about Dire Maul, generally speaking, you either have to have, usually you want a rogue in like a Dire Maul North run to lockpick the door at the top, or you can bring an engineer and they blow the door up. That's the general strategy of doing Dire Maul North. You have to do that every time for your world buffs and all that, and I don't want to get into that so much. But I think that was huge. I think that adding the repair bot, thank God, repair bot was added in 1.3 in BRD, right? So you guys have seen some of my older stuff. You guys know that I'm a big beneficiary of repair bots being in the game. So I love repair bots. So very, very good thing that was added in 1.3.
That was a big convenience that was added. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So
and
go ahead, Tips.
Oh, and what's, when we're bringing up plus damage items, why is that so important? Well, at the beginning of Vanilla, obviously, you had Molten Core, which was released pretty much at launch. So throughout the course of Vanilla, you had things like Dire Maul, world bosses, you had raids like ZG, essentially catch-up dungeons and raids that gave you better gear than what was released at the start. So it's important to talk about these things because if you're somebody that wants to see Dire Maul at the start of the game, or you think it's a good idea to have that dungeon available right at launch of Classic, you have to understand that it does impact a lot of the raids. And as we kind of know today, or at least we theorize today, a lot of the early raids in Vanilla were actually relatively easy compared to the stuff we see today. So when people say they don't want to see Dire Maul until it was actually released back in vanilla, they're saying that because they don't want these extra power items, these better items, to be equipped in Molten Core and trivialize that raid even more than it already has been. So I just figured I'd put that out.
Absolutely, it does. It does. Having these items early on in the game does serve to trivialize this early content. Absolutely.
And I think it's an indirect form of balancing classes through changing the itemization options available to them. And I think that's something that people need to, I think, just have a better grasp of, just an understanding of that. Because if you look at the Magister set or any of the caster sets, Devout set, Healer set, whatever, the stats on them, it's like stamina, intellect, spirit. They might have a random something else on there, right? And their set bonuses give you some plus healing, plus damage. But as far as what's on the set themselves, I believe the dungeon sets, none of them have any plus damage. Stay safe. Are you? Can you help me out on that?
You are correct. You are correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So having off pieces like the is it amplifying cloak in Dire Maul? Is that the one with plus damage?
Yeah. And there's tons of gear. There's tons of gear actually.
Yeah. So there's stuff like that gets added into the game to help supplement, right, and take advantage of the spell coefficients and whatnot. So it's almost a way of balancing a role as opposed to balancing a specific class, right?
It is interesting though. It's like Molten Core and Ahn'Qiraj were only hard or challenging because casters were so underperforming. You know what I mean? Like the melee DPS were doing just fine. They had gear to support them, but casters really did not have items in game to support their gameplay. They were like Warlocks probably were the most underperforming DPS at the launch of Vanilla WoW. They really sucked just because they didn't have gear.
Yeah, no, for sure. And really, I would even say outside of classes that, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but there was very few classes that didn't change very much throughout the course of vanilla. As far as like, I'll just go ahead and say it now, but rogues, for example, did not have a lot of big changes throughout the course of vanilla because the way they were designed was just good, right? I mean, they did good damage all the way through. Things worked out for them. They had different spec options, combat daggers, if you wanted to go swords. If you wanted to do you had different options for PvP as well. So you had that, but we'll get into that a little bit more later, I guess.
Yeah, you guys are going to see as we go through all these patches, every class has a talent tree rework at one point. Every single class gets touched upon, their talent trees does. And then, of course, every patch, all the classes are having, little spell coefficients or ability coefficients changed. But yeah, every class throughout Vanilla WoW has a talent tree rework. So it takes
and some more than others.
Patches, and some more than others, exactly. It takes them an entire game lifespan or all 12 patches to get the classes in a spot that they want them to be at.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the big PvP patch, 1.4. 1.4 is when the honor system was implemented. That's whenever diminishing returns were implemented. That thank God, right? Because that was a nightmare. Those of us who played back then, you remember less and less, over time. But there's some things that just stick with you, and being fear spammed for like 20 seconds is one of those things that will haunt me forever. So diminishing returns, thank God. I know. Stay safe. Do you want to talk about the honor system a little bit? Do you want to talk about the honor system?
Yeah. So like you said, when it came out, there were no BGs. And so this is the era of when people talk about South Shore versus Tauren Mill. This is the era of South Shore versus Tauren Mill. There were no BGs. So people were trying to find places in the game where you could maximize your honor per hour. Just maximize your honor per hour. And so you have to factor in respawn times with your graveyards, and where's the closest alliance graveyard to the closest horde graveyard? South Shore versus Tauren Mill. That's where it was. It's because it's like the closest to horde and alliance bases. So you had people farming honor there all day, every day. They were trying to rank up. It's a new honor system. There's 14 ranks. You've got to farm honor. Where are you going to do it? That's where it happened.
Exactly. And they also added the Guribashi Arena 3-hour event, the chest in the middle of the arena. So that actually wasn't available at launch. And I actually have a funny story about that. One of the guilds that I was in at the time, we actually had no idea what was in the chest. And I guess somebody had assumed that it could be any item in the game. It was just like a complete RNG loot box, basically. So we would run that every 3 hours, no matter what. And we never won, of course. Like by that point, there were a couple of 60s in the game. It was about 6 months into the game. We're talking about early May 2005. So it's just funny that this kind of random event could have so much mystique surrounding it, and could create this massive PvP event every 3 hours. Obviously, before the battlegrounds were introduced. So 1.4 was kind of the peak of world PvP, so to speak. You had the honor system finally, and then you had all of the incentives to PvP out in the world.
No doubt, absolutely. I mean, up to this point, the next patch is when they add Battlegrounds 1.5. But up to this point, they had a very clear design philosophy. They had the Gurubashi event, world bosses they've added, the 2 world bosses, and they have the honor system in the game now with no BGs. So they had a very clear intention, I think. We want people in the world killing each other. Right. I think that was a goal of theirs.
Pretty much. And they made a few other changes, seemingly minor, right? I mean, the elemental invasion event was also in this patch, right? So consequently more PvP, right? Because you're going to have the elemental invasions in contested areas, Un'Goro, Silithus, so on. And what's good about the elemental invasions, and specifically for the 1.4 patch, right? 1.4 patch, all you've got is a Nixian MC currently. The elemental invasions in Un'Goro, right, with the fire elementals, you can farm those for
elemental fire.
Elemental fire. There you go. Elemental fire. Yeah, no thanks. And you use that to craft fire protection potions, and that helps with the progression of MC. So adding more mobs that drop more of those into the auction house, the economy, so to speak, it allows for more ways to make Molten Core a little bit easier, right? And I do think that was elemental invasions were a big part of that. And then also, like Stay Safe was saying, they want people, they put these in these contested areas, so you're going to have Horde and Alliance there, not just trying to farm, kill those things, but killing each other so that whoever survives gets to farm, basically.
And then 1.5 happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then they had the BGs. But before we move on to 1.5, another big thing they added in 1.4 is diminishing returns. When WoW came out, there were no diminishing returns. So if you're a rogue, you can sap someone indefinitely. If you're a warlock, you can fear someone indefinitely. And it happened. They quickly realized, what are we now? 6 months into the game? They're like, man, we've got to add in diminishing returns.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. And that's something that, I mean, diminishing returns have ended up being like a core part of like PvP strategy since then, throughout the later expansions and arena and whatnot. But yeah, I think diminishing returns were an absolutely huge thing that was added in 1.4. Oh, and you know what else? I just remembered. You guys know if you land from a griffin, you become an honorless target for about 30 seconds, right? That wasn't in the game in 1.4. They added it like in 1.4.1, right? So they saw that people to grind honor were literally sitting in Tanaris, wherever, and just camping flight masters. So people would come in, they'd land, and they just kill them right away while they were AFK, right? So
and they have no way of retaliating,
Yeah, so they went ahead and they were like, okay, we need to make this honorless target so that people aren't just camping flight masters for honor all day.
You can imagine back in the day, like if you land at a flight master, it might take you a couple seconds to even load in people's units and NPCs and stuff. They literally had no chance to react.
Yeah,
exactly. And we said the time frame. We're talking about 6 months here. So if you're one of those individuals that wants to see 1-1 all the way to 112, we're talking about a 6-month period where you can be chain feared without any sort of recompense. You can be killed at your Griffin Master, and it's just a lot of abuse. A lot of abuse can be dished out in those first 6 months. So just keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. So just a couple more things. As far as spellcasters go, namely healers. Really, this affects healers. I mean, it affects all spellcasters, but healers, more specifically, the 5-second rule for mana regen. You start regenning mana in combat after 5 seconds. You have your mana per 5 stat and you have your spirit stat. So you get the mana regen from Spirit after 5 seconds of not casting. Before 1.4, the 5-second rule would check at the beginning of your spell cast, as opposed to at the end of your spell cast. And it's like, okay, like why does that matter, right? Whenever you're healing, a lot of times you'll start casting a heal, and then you might move to cancel or hit escape to cancel your heal if you notice that the tank or whoever is topped off, right? And I'm thinking about a raid situation. I know for me, a lot of times whenever I have healed, I'd be sitting there like I'd hit flash a light, right? I hit flash a light, and like a second in, I was like, oh, he's got full heal, and I'll move and I'll cast another one. And he got full healed again. I'll move, cast another one, and I'll wait to almost like snipe out the heal, right? To be efficient with my mana. And during that time, I would be getting mana regen I'd be getting it before the cast ended. But prior to 1.4, as soon as I pressed that button, it would flag me for not having any sort of regen.
Right, right.
And then
that's a very big change. You're right.
Yeah, and for priests and for druids, plus healing didn't affect heal over time spells that are cast on other people. So plus healing was not. I mean, it was a good stat. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's always a good stat, but it became better for druids and for priests, and namely, I mean, druids, they've got regrowth and rejuve. I mean, their whole thing is heal over time, right? So that was a pretty big buff for druid healing in 1.4 as well.
No doubt. Mm-hmm. Do you guys want to move on to 1.5?
Yeah, I know Tips touched on it. Tips, you want to go ahead and get us started on 1.5?
So 1.5 was the battlegrounds patch. Introduced Warsong Gulch and Alterac Valley. Alterac Valley was a level 51 to 60 battleground. A lot of people might not know that. And for the first time, you had instanced BGs, and almost overnight, I mean, especially at the max level, at the higher levels, world PvP was pretty much decimated from the world. You still had world PvP at levels and like while you were leveling and whatnot. There are some bonus objectives here and there. The Gurubashi event, world bosses, of course. That still persists throughout vanilla. But in general, the vast majority of PvP now took place in battlegrounds. And a lot of new items were added into the game. Wands used to be a toggle, but I'll let you guys get into that a little bit. And of course, the legendary Hand of Ragnaros was introduced into the game in patch 1.5.
Mm-hmm. They also added dishonorable kills. I think prior to BGs, they saw, okay, people are camping crossroads 12 hours a day. We need to try to disincentivize that a little bit. So they added dishonorable kills. So now if you're ranking and you get a DK, a dishonorable kill, it'll decrease the rate at which you're ranking. It'll inhibit that a lot. It'll slow you down.
Yeah, I was one of the crossroads people. I would always go crossroads. Yeah, I was one of those guys. But no, I mean that's the thing. I mean they added dishonorable kills basically because people were going and killing quest givers, right? So like people couldn't quest. People were trying to like the opposing faction was just trying to quest and level up, and then I don't know, some crazy rat paladin might run up and just kill that quest giver for no reason. But that was, I think that was one of the big reasons behind adding the DKs. But what it really hurt was the city rates, because you have random civilians now running around the cities, and if you're in a raid with somebody and somebody kills a civilian and you're trying to rank, then you get that. Now it's basically whenever you get a dishonorable kill, it just deletes like 2% of your bar, like right off the top, right? I think your first one is. I've heard a bunch of different things. I've heard it's 5% every time. I've heard it's 2% first and then 5% the second time. So it's depending on where you are in your ranking. Like if you're like rank 3, then whatever, right? But if you're like rank 10, rank 11, rank 12, 13, like that's brutal to lose that much honor. So it's one of those things where it kind of it really hurt city raids. That was the biggest thing that I think it did was hurting city raids, which kind of sucks. So
yeah. And when Esfand says 2%, 5%, when you're getting higher up in the ranks, you obviously need more honor to continue ranking up because of diminishing returns, or the decay system.
Right. Stay safe. Sorry. Go ahead.
Actually, I was going to say Stay Safe did a great video on this. You guys need to check it out. It's like incredibly informative, breaking down the entire honor system. But 5% at like rank 11 is like 20 hours of your time or something along those lines.
It's brutal.
Yeah. It's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just got a dishonorable kill. You're going to have to grind PvP for an additional 20 hours just to make up for that. And obviously, that's why dishonorable kills in recent days have become a big point of contention for Classic. A lot of people don't want to see them because, in general, it disincentivizes grouping up with people and raiding a city. And I think
Mhm.
that's an experience a lot of people want to relive. So,
Oh yeah, no
dishonor,
doubt.
absolutely. So, dishonorable kills, their status in the game, we don't know yet. But if you have an opinion on them, I definitely think it's something you should voice because their impact is tangible.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I hate to have to take a step back, but we missed something really big in 1.4. In 1.4, they removed the original epic mounts. They added the armored
Mm,
mounts, the
Oh,
armored
that's
epic mounts.
right.
that's true.
So, and I wrote it down. This is the 5 month mark after the game's launch. So if Classic WoW launches with an actual vanilla WoW timeline, you've got 5 months to get your original epic mount, your unarmored epic mount. Just throwing that out there.
Hmm. No, that's a really good point. Yeah, and it's funny because they added that, and you have the option to swap. You could turn in your old epic mount for a new
Right,
armored one,
right.
but it's like no, dude, I have like a vintage epic mount. Like, there's no way that I'm actually gonna do this. I'm sure some people did, but I know for me personally, like I would keep the old one, right? I would keep the classic
I bet
epic
some
mount.
people did, and they regret it so much because there's a
Oh yeah.
special achievement for it in Modern WoW now. There's a special achievement for
Oh
it, a feat of
really?
strength, I think. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
But anyway, yeah, back to 1.5. This is the patch where they add cloth turn-ins for your major faction
Mm.
reputation. So if you're trying to get exalted with Darnassus to get the new armored epic mounts, epic night sabers, you can turn in, rune cloth to get Darnassus rep. Before you had to do the Darnassus leveling quests at the appropriate level and do your Mario grain stuff. It was super annoying.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know some people they just leveled up. Like if you wanted a tiger mount, you would create your character level 1 and then bolt to Teldrassil to try and just get as much night elf rep as you possibly can, as much Darnassus rep that you possibly can, so that you could get a
Yeah.
tiger mount later on. Now
Yeah, because the rep is nerfed if you come back and do low level quests at level 60. You
Mhm.
get like 1/10 or 1/5 of what you would normally get. So if there's a level 20 night elf quest you want to get the Darnassus rep, you need to do it at level 20 for maximum rep.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I know Tips, you said this, and I agree. I think battlegrounds did technically hurt world PvP a lot, but one of the big things was that uh, you didn't have the battle masters in the cities yet. So people
Yeah.
still did have to run to Alterac Valley and Warsong. Those were the only two released at the time. So they still had to run to those entrances in for the or for everybody, I guess. It's in Arathi Highlands and
Northern Barons.
yeah, Northern Barons, Southern Ashenvale. I guess that one. Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's still something. There's still world PvP going on there too. But yeah, no, without a doubt, I think moving a lot of the PvP to the battlegrounds, it helps for people who are ranking to get more honor because they have a direct way of getting honor. And actually originally, if I don't know if you guys remember this, but originally the level caps for the battlegrounds leveling up were not 29, 39, so on, but it was like 30, 40, and I don't remember. I think the exact last bracket was 51 to 60, and then everything else stopped at instead of 50 to 60 or 50 to 59, excuse me.
Yeah.
So I might need some clarification on that because I don't quite remember, but I do remember having a twink, right? I do remember having a twink rogue, and I had requires level 30 gear, and I was at level 30, so they basically killed all those twinks off, and people had to re-level up if they wanted to twink at 30 or 29.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why I remember that thing exactly, but I don't remember actually the gap in between there. So
Yeah.
um,
And
go ahead. Sorry.
And just a couple of quick clarifications. The reason that was so big was because at level 30 in vanilla, that's when you unlock your first big, like major talent point.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can unlock a lot of very powerful skills. So if you're in a 21 to 30 bracket, the difference between a level 30 and a level 29 is actually pretty huge. And more importantly, at level 40, that's when you unlock pretty much your major ability in your talent tree. So if you're a level 40
And your mount.
warrior
And
and
your
your
mount.
mount,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So if you're level 40, you have a mount and you have Mortal Strike. When a level 39 warrior doesn't have either of those two things, that gives you a significant advantage over them. So definitely a huge change there.
Mhm. So,
All
I guess
right,
from
is
there,
it time for
I
1.6?
think it is time for 1.6.
This is the assault on Blackwing Lair. They add in Blackwing Lair in this patch, and this is when they start. They're like, oh man, the classes are kind of scuffed. We need to rework some talent trees now. So this is when they start reworking talent trees. They start with Warrior and Warlock. I'm going to go over Warlock. Tips out. You can go over Warrior. But with Warlock, the two big changes they changed Soul Link from an on-use spell to an activatable spell, a permanent buff for both you and your demon. So before you used it, it was on like a what? It was on a cooldown. It lasted a couple seconds, then you had to wait to use it again. This time it's activatable. It's a permanent buff for both you and your demon. And they also added in the demonology tree, Master Demonologist, which gave you and your demon a passive buff depending on which demon it is. Like if you have a succubus out, you have more shadow damage, and then the buffs change depending on the demon. So those are the two big Warlock changes to the talent tree added in patch 1.6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Warriors changed a lot. They changed a lot, to be honest. Before patch 1.5, Fury Warrior DPS wasn't really a thing. Bloodthirst actually used to operate closely to what Victory Rush is today. It was 100% increased damage after you killed a target that reaped you honor or experience. But obviously, they changed that to an instant attack that does 45% of attack power and it heals you for the next couple of swings. So that's actually a huge deal. And on top of that, this was actually in patch 1.5, but kind of bled into patch 1.6. They added the dual wield specialization. So your offhand would do 25% more increased damage. And at the same time, one of the biggest nerfs to PvP warriors, Mortal Strike was massively nerfed from being a 200% damage, a weapon damage swing, to weapon damage plus 85. Now, just think about this for a second. If you have something like Ahn'Qiraj, which Esfand helped me out here, is like 300 base damage, something along those lines.
344, I believe, the exact number.
Off the top of his head. Wow.
So if you take 344 and you multiply it by 2, you're looking at, 600, 700 damage, more or less. That essentially would get nerfed to 344 plus 85, which is like 400 damage. So a very significant nerf to Mortal Strike. And as a result, Warriors got all of their talent points refunded to them because things got pretty crazy. And the last thing, in the defensive talent tree, you actually used to have an ability called Shield Discipline, which was more of a defensive cooldown ability that would absorb damage. And that was changed and replaced by Shield Bash, which is an offensive aggro inducing ability. Warriors were much more defensive oriented before the rework. Now Blizzard had accommodated some of the lack of threat generation and given them more powerful abilities to gain threat. So a lot of changes for Warriors. And finally, Fury DPS was starting to emerge. And of course, with Blackwing Lair, a lot of the good items, a lot of good one-handers also started to come out there as well.
Mm-hmm. And just
That's
to
a
add
lot.
on top of that, I just want to throw in, since they're somewhat similar, right? Ret and Fury. A lot of the plate DPS items, there were plate DPS items that were added in the 1.5 patch as well, right? Onslaught Girdle, best in slot, plate DPS belt until Girdle of the Mentor in Nax. I remember people were using Onslaught Girdle until they got Red Belt of Battle in BC. So Onslaught Girdle drops off of Rag, Flame Guard Gauntlets, 54 attack power, 1% crit gloves, awesome plate gloves. So there was more options, right? More options were being added, plate DPS gloves, or plate DPS gear. And then also, like Tips was saying, there was plate DPS gear and weapons that were added in Blackwing Lair that were a huge help to that as well. So that on top of the rework for Fury is whenever Fury Warrior DPS really started to pick up quite a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Tip said this when he was talking about his Warrior talent tree rework. They actually did this for every talent tree for all nine classes they reworked. They reset your talent points. So if we have a actual vanilla WoW progression timeline, you could expect that probably they're going to refund your talent points just because the talent trees have changed. You might want to change something up.
Exactly.
But also with this patch, they added Darkmoon Fair. Darkmoon Fair, it's kind of fun. It's kind of goofy. It actually gives you a really big buff. It gives you a really big raid buff. You can get 10% extra damage, right? It's a huge raid buff. Of course, you can only get it once a month. And every other month it switches from Mulgore to Elwyn Forest. But you'll have alliance guilds on Mulgore week or Mulgore month. They'll run all the way to Mulgore, get the world buff, and then go to their raid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's very, very powerful.
You might have an alt account, a low level warlock that's just hiding out there to start summoning your warlocks and then get your raid summoned out there to get there as fast as possible too. So,
yeah.
Crazy vanilla stuff that goes on.
Yeah. And then the last big change, I guess, here is they added battle masters to the capital cities. So you no longer need to run to Northern Barrens if you're Horde to queue up for Warsong Gulch.
Yeah, and that's going back to the point that we talked about in the last patch is the world PvP of having to actually run there is now that's reduced, right? Because people aren't really going there unless they're going there for rep rewards and stuff. So
yeah.
So the next patch, really the once you hit 1.6, once Blackwing Lair is released, that's whenever things really start to ramp up and get fun in vanilla WoW. Because before that, it's like we said earlier, it's a lot of bug fixes, a lot of trying to figure this out, trying to figure that out. The devs are trying to find out how are people reacting to the classes that are in the game, how are paladins being used, how are druids being used, and so on. Once they see like, okay, this is like this, we want it to be like this, or like it's best for the game if it's like this, that's whenever the reworks start coming in. That's whenever we start getting additional content. So 1.6 was BWL, and 1.7 is ZG. And I know that Stay Safe, big fan of the ZG patch as a warlock. You wanna start us off there, go into that?
Yeah, so let me say, warlocks, as far as their raid spec, they don't get any hit talents. They don't have any hit percentage from their talent trees. So Zul'Gurub, mages get 6%. I'm so jealous in their talent tree. Zul'Gurub adds a lot of plus hit items for casters. Blackwing Lair was pretty good. It adds a lot of gear for everyone. Zul'Gurub really gives a lot of hit gear for casters. It helps a ton. So big caster patch. And then also, this is when they do a hunter rework. So the hunter rework, they added Bestial Wrath to the Beast Mastery tree as the final talent. And in the survival, the entire survival tree, it's like it just flip-flops. The survival tree used to be a melee hunter spec. It wasn't a range spec. It was a melee hunter spec, with most talents buffing melee abilities with stats like parry and bonus melee crit. It was bonkers, man. And the final talent used to be a melee applied bleed called Lacerate, right, whereas now it's called Wyvern Sting, right? It's the mana drain ability. So survival saw a huge overhaul with 1.7.
Or the sleep ability is what you meant.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. My bad.
Yeah. One thing too, and I think it's funny. You're saying survival used to be a melee hunter spec. I mean, just taking hunters specifically, but there's a lot of stuff that was in the game in alpha that they wanted to implement and they wanted to figure out, or early on in WoW. I believe it was in alpha, hunters had focus as a stat, but they didn't like it because it didn't allow for as many options as far as playability goes as mana does. Because how they had focus in the past was I believe your focus bar would go up if you were like standing still and shooting. So like if you were, it makes sense. Again, like I said earlier, it's a role playing game. It's RP, right? If I'm standing still and I'm real focused on I'm shooting my target, then my focus is going to go up. I'm going to do more damage. Sure, that makes sense, right? But from a playability perspective, it was just better to give them mana at the time. So
yeah, imagine PvPing as a hunter and not being able to use your abilities if you're not standing still.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, that'd be really bad. But I mean, especially now, dude. I mean, hunters in vanilla WoW, like that's what they're known for is kiting. Like that's their strength, is being able to kite people around. So just totally opposites from a design standpoint. But what I'm trying to get at now is it's funny because in Legion, survival is a melee hunter spec, and they have focus. So it's funny how things change and they go back. It's just weird. Like they're constantly calling back to like original design stuff. Paladins eventually were giving Crusader Strike. Paladins had Crusader Strike in the alpha and the beta, right?
Yeah.
So it's weird how stuff like that has changed back and forth over time, for better or for worse, right? We're classic guys here, right? But it's just interesting to see like how they've looked back and forth at how they flip back and forth between different things over time.
And because Stay Safe brought up the hunter rework as well, one thing to keep in mind, we just had a warrior rework in 1.6, In 1.7, you have like 6 or 7 additional warrior changes. And that continues to the end of 112. Even though they reworked different classes in every single patch, they're still addressing a lot of the different class flaws. And so just because a class experiences a rework in a particular patch doesn't mean that Blizzard just left it and stopped touching it. Every single patch, they were trying to figure out how to balance the classes, how to make more specs viable. So it was definitely an ongoing thing. And it's very difficult to say that the classes at the start of vanilla were in a good spot. In fact, it's almost impossible to say that. And it's very clear that Blizzard didn't feel that way. And when you go from 112 to 1.1, you just see an entirely different, almost a different view of the game, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say the Stranglethorn fishing extravaganza. They also introduced that. So if you want Hook of the Master Angler, you want to turn to a fish for 3 minutes, you do it on the weekends. I think today in the modern game, it rewards you with I think you got a couple of choices, but you can get that ring, right? The heirloom
ring. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's some big content right there.
I was never much of a fisher, so I don't really know, but I do know that they added Hammer of Wrath, which is a nice. I mean, I can get into the specifics of Hammer of Wrath, but I'm not going to do that here. But Hammer of Wrath was added. The ranged execute for paladins was also added in 1.7.
Right.
So
that's big. Mm-hmm. Have we said they added the Arathi Basin this patch? This is the Arathi Basin patch.
I don't think we did. Yeah, or that is the Arathi Basin patch. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, so you get your final vanilla WoW battlegrounds. You have all 3 of them out now: Warsong Gulch, AV, and AB. Mm-hmm. And it was awesome, and it was great. It was a great battleground.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. I mean, for me personally, I remember back in the day. This has changed since, but back in the day, AB was my favorite. Warsong eventually became my favorite, just for different reasons, like my play style and whatnot. But one of the things that's interesting about AB is that I think amongst the higher end community, I mean, not even that. I mean, it's a lot of people believe this. Minor speed enchant to boots is the best enchant to get on your boots, because you can get stats. Yep. I mean, you can get stats from gear, but it's hard to get. There's not a lot of pieces of gear in the game that give you a speed increase, right? One of those pieces that give you a speed increase are the rep boots from Arathi Basin. So if you happen to be a plate DPS, a Fury Warrior or whatever, you can go get your rep up with Arathi Basin and go get those boots. So now you can get a +7 agility enchant to your boots. So 20 agility is 20 agility is 1 crit, right? So 0.35 crit on your boots because you already have the speed enchant built in. So that's big for plate DPS. Well, for all DPS, but for plate specifically, how I'm thinking about it.
I know what some people are thinking. The Arathi Basin speed boots, they do not stack with the speed boot enchant. You can have one or the other.
Right.
Just throw that out there.
Yeah, and that goes for all speed enchants, but not all speed buffs in the game.
Right.
Yeah. ZG, AB. Just to talk about ZG a little bit more, right? At this point you had 2 raids in the game, right? 3 if you want to count Ixia, right? So you had 3 40-man raid instances in the game, and we've seen the subscriber graph, right? If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it. I think that's a cool thing to look at, is seeing the subscriber graph through the course of vanilla, right? And at this point in the game, WoW is booming, right? Game's popping off, people are playing it, people are new, but the elitist mindset sets in because it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to bring a guy in greens to MC whenever at the beginning it's like, dude, we need 40 people. Let's just grab whoever we can find, right? Yeah. But over time, it's like, I'm not bringing that guy in greens. You might get to the point where you're in BWO and it's like, that guy's in all blues. He doesn't have a single epic item, right? But what happens with what Blizzard realized is, like, we need to add catch-up mechanics into the game, and the first really big one was the ZG patch, was ZG, right? Because now you can go in a 20-man raid, and you can get good blue gear, right? Good blue gear that's, it's like, I say as a general statement, it's like a half step down from MC gear, but there's also some pretty nice epic items in that game, like Fang of the Faceless is one of the best in slot weapons for a hunter, right? As far as a stat stick goes. And I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, I just not to. I don't want to go through and list all the items, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that's really, really good. And then there's also a, it's not a tier set, but it's a ZG set that you can get, the Zandalar sets, whatever.
Yeah.
And those
There's a lot
are
of
pretty
gear,
nice.
and also now you have a new set of enchants, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
The Yojamba Island enchants, whatever it's called. You also have another world buff you can get if you're trying to min-max your rates. One more world buff is out now.
Absolutely.
The heart of Makar world buff.
And arguably the best world buff. Because you got
through death.
Yeah, persist through death, 15% all stats, 2 hours, and speed as well. So I was talking about speed stacking, right? If you go, basically, it's just speed is great for DPS, and people forget that, right? People is good for DPS, it's good for tanking, and it's good for healing. Because it helps you avoid mechanics and times whenever you have to run out, or if you get knocked back or something, you have to get in a position, it just helps you get there faster. So I know in not to get too far ahead, but in AQ40, you can get a Zanza pot. That's another thing that's added in this patch, right? The Zandalar flasks. So there's a swiftness flask, and there's a 50 stamina, 50 spirit flask, and then there's a spell reflect flask. And all that takes is 3 bijous, right? You take 3 bijous and pulverize them at the altar on the Zandalar Isle, and then you take that, and then you can get an additional flask on top of your Titan Supreme Power, whatever you're using. So that's real big time as well. And I think another thing too, just one more thing with the ZG patch, is, well, actually, let me reel it back a little bit. I was talking about Fang of the Faceless, right? And this is gonna lead us into 1.8. Do you guys have anything else you want to add with 1.7?
I got one thing real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, the big thing you already mentioned at Esfand in regarding to a catch-up raid, or essentially an ability to gain, or an opportunity to gain good gear that would help trivialize prerequisite content. And I'm going to keep bringing this up probably throughout this entire podcast. If you're somebody that wants 112 as it was, everything at the same time from Molten Core to Naxx, released right at the start of Classic, you have to understand there's a reason why people don't want all the content at the same time. And one of those reasons is that raids like ZG, dungeons like Dire Maul, even some of the rep rewards from AV and the BGs, a lot of these things just make early content almost a face roll. And when you've got, the buff from ZG, when you've got the enchants, when you've got some of the epic items there and the really good blues, it makes previous content less fun. And you miss the progression going through all of the different tiers and all of the different waves of content. So again, I railed on the 1.1 guys a little bit earlier. Now I'm railing on the 1.12 guys a little bit earlier right now. And we'll get to the conclusion at the end, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think it's absolutely vital that they have progressive content released. Like you can't come out and drop Naxx right at the start. It's not going to be a good situation. Not good at all. But when I want to talk about with Fang of the Faceless, and like I said, this was going to lead us into 1.8. 1.8 was a really, really big patch. It was a very impactful patch for Melee because they added weapon normalization, right? What is normalization? They said that there was, as more and more gear had been added to the game, you had certain items that were slower speed and lower DPS, but because they're slower speed, their top end damage is higher, right? So you had something like Arcanite Reaper, which was, I believe, 256 top end damage at 3.8 speed. You had the Nicker, which is 239 top end damage at 4.0 speed, and that's an item from LBRS, right? I think that requires level 53 or something, 52 maybe. It's a lower level item, but the top end damage is so high that whenever you have stuff like a Mortal Strike that just adds a flat 85 on top of it, it makes those worse items better. And they wanted to add a disparity, a bigger disparity between the lower end gear and the higher end gear as far as weapons go for Melee, with instant attacks. Again, like Mortal Strike, Sinister Strike, stuff like that, right? For a Paladin, not so much. Paladins they use procs, so it's different. So things that proc or things that are on next swing, like Heroic Strike, it doesn't affect that. And I wanted to use Fang of the Faceless as an example because that's a 1.9 speed a 1.9 speed dagger, and the normalization for daggers, I believe, was moved to 1.7. For two-handed, it was moved to 3.3, and for one-handed, for other one-handers, it was moved to 2.4. Right. So again, not to get too in depth on the numbers. I don't want to worry anybody, but with a two-handed, right? Like if two-handed was normalized to 3.3, right? And I had a 3.5 speed Ahn'Qiraj, right? I have a 3.5 speed Ahn'Qiraj, 344 top end damage. Then now it's taking the DPS value to look at the damage calculation as opposed to the top end damage value. So it changed how that was calculated. So now it's looking at, I believe it's 80.1 or something. It's like 80 DPS for the Ahn'Qiraj times 3.3 to look at the DPS, as opposed to just looking at that top end value, right? Or the damage range and getting the value from there. So that was really, really, really big, and that's kind of where you get the legend of Arcanite Reaper, right? We were talking about Legal Danish with Nixium. I just touched on it briefly in the last podcast. And, Arcanite Reaper, the guy jumps in. Arcanite Reaper became this legendary weapon because it had such high top end damage because it was slow, right? The same thing with the Nicker, right? In LBRS. So that was really, really huge, and it changed how people itemized. So a weapon like Fang of the Faceless ended up being not as good for rogues, whereas the patch prior, whenever it was put in the game, was considered really, really, really good for rogues because it was a 1.9 speed dagger. Same thing with Barman Shank from BRD. Was a really, really good dagger because it was so slow, right? And whenever they changed the whenever they normalized everything, it nerfed those items to make the other items better. Fang of the Faceless became more of a hunter item at that point because it was a better stat stick than something like Corehound Tooth would be better for a rogue, for example. But
Exactly.
I'll tell you, man, as a caster, I'm so happy I don't have to know any of this. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Well, to summarize it, right, it's very simple. Before this patch, a 4.0 weapon speed axe, for example, that had 250 top end damage, and a 3.5 weapon speed axe that had 250 top end damage, you would think they would do the exact same damage because their top end is the same. Well, there's actually an internal equation that Blizzard used to calculate damage that went beyond just what your top end damage was. And in that equation, there was a coefficient for each individual weapon. They decided to standardize that coefficient, like Esfand said, to 3.3, so that when you have a 4.0 axe speed or a 4.0 axe that does 250 damage and a 3.5 axe that does 250 damage, they will do the exact same damage. So it was an internal coefficient that was changed. And it's something that it's mathematical and all that stuff. We don't want to get into depth, but in reality, it was very non-intuitive beforehand. It's really dumb to have two weapons with the same exact top end damage do different damage. Like it's not something apparent to players. You know what I mean?
I like the normalization. I like the normalization change because it was an indirect buff for paladins because paladins weren't affected by it. So I was all for it. But yeah, no, I bet I totally lost some people getting in the numbers there. I'm sorry about that. I have a tendency.
TLDR, very big change for melee DPS.
Yes, huge change.
Okay, that's the takeaway.
Yeah. Something else. World Dragons. The Emerald Dragons were added in the 1.8 patch. So that was good because the World Dragon. First off, now you're flipping it back. More World PvP events, World boss battles. We already talked about Azurgos and Kazakh were already in the game, but now you have. I can stay safe. Can you name them all?
Oh nope, I can't.
I don't think I can either.
Put me on the spot, man.
No. Is it Ysander? I mean, it's the four Emerald Dragons, and they add nature resist gear, right? Nature resist gear to the they have nature resist gear in their loot table, but yeah, that's a big deal because the top end guilds would go kill the World Dragons, and they would get that nature resist gear in preparation for AQ40. Huhuran is a boss in AQ40 that requires a lot of nature resist for the melee. Viscidus for everybody in the raid. Actually, you need some NR for Viscidus. But again, just kind of preparing the game for the later content. right? And that's the one thing you'll notice too throughout the course of the game is they implement something in the game at this point. It's like this is going to help for later. We talked about Maradon a little while ago, right? That's another dungeon, a lower level dungeon that you can go get small man group, like 3-man, go in there with some buddies and get like a nature resist trinket and some stuff like that as well. So
yeah. I remember being 10 years old, and I had this memory of I was leveling through Duskwood, and there's 40 people running into the Duskwood Dragon location.
Yes.
And I whisper one of them like, "Hey, what's going on?" And they're like, "There's a world dragon up." And I'm like, "Oh, what's that? What does that drop? What do you get from that?" And they're like, "Epics." And I ran and I saw them all dying to this dragon. And I'm like, crap. I'm never gonna. I thought they meant epic mount. I didn't know about epic items yet. I thought it was their epic mount. I'm like, I'm never gonna get my epic mount. That's way too hard.
Yeah.
Dude, that is just like there's something like, and somebody else mentioned this to me a while back because I was explaining. I had a friend playing WoW with me for the first time, and it was something almost enchanting about seeing somebody else experience the game for the first time, because it's like, what epic items, like what is this, what is that, and it's very, very interesting to see people experience content for the first time. And I know I've been streaming Warcraft 3, and I've never played Warcraft 3 before, and it's actually I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's kind of the same thing. Like I've had people tell me that too about Warcraft 3. It's like, dude, I love Warcraft 3. I played it all the time whenever I was little, and it's so cool to see somebody else get to experience it for the first time ever. But yeah, it's the same exact thing with WoW, and I would say a lot of other games too. Is probably a lot of that, right?
Yeah, it briefly allows you to live vicariously through that other person, and it calls back all the memories. Like Stacey, what you just said, I remember coming across the portal in Duskwood for the first time, like going through all the different Duskwood quests and realizing what's this big spot in the middle of the map that I haven't like unlocked yet.
Yeah.
And you walk there and you're like, oh my God, what is this? There's the little dragon guard there that's got the skull on his nameplate. And you're just like, oh my God, dude, what is this?
What's going on?
What's that? It's those like little small moments, those moments of mystique that really help the world come to life.
Yeah, no doubt, dude. No freaking doubt. I know, I believe the Silithus content was also added. Is that right? In the 1.8 patch is whenever they added some of the Silithus content, Cenarian Circle type stuff.
Yes. They reworked Silithus. Before it was honestly just like an empty zone. So they added leveling quests and then also some quests to do at 60. But sort of prepping it for the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj patch 1.9, which comes up next. But before we move on to that, let's talk about this. In this patch, they do the Druid rework. They mess with the Druid talent trees. So what they've done with that, Moonkin form was added in the balance tree. Prior to this patch, there was no Moonkin form. Prior to Moonkin form being the final talent in the balance tree, it was a spell called Hurricane, which was sort of an aura that you toggled on that lasted 10 seconds, and it did AoE damage to everyone around you, and it reduced their attack speed by 20%. Hurricane was the ability name, your final balance talent point. And then also Feral Druids, they didn't have Leader of the Pack, which was the 3% crit talent, the melee crit talent for you and your party members. So they added that. And the final restoration talent was not Swift Mend. Instead, it was Innervate. So you didn't have Innervate as a baseline ability. So big changes for Druids as well during this patch. 1.8, this patches.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine playing. I mean, Druids prior to 1.8 were totally different. Just from what it sounds like. I mean, they totally reworked the trees.
Yeah. And that's about a year into the game, by the way. So definitely a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So
okay, 1.9, right?
Yeah, we were talking about AQ. I was just gonna say we started talking about AQ a little bit, so I think it's a good time to go ahead and go into 1.9. And for me personally, 1.9 is a big patch that hits home because that was the Paladin rework patch. And Paladins, it's kind of a hot topic, right? It's kind of a hot topic because a lot of people would argue that Paladins, in a sense, got nerfed with their rework. Now, if you were a Ret DPS, it helped you out quite a bit, right? But pretty much doing anything else that a Paladin had done, it just flipped it upside down, basically. As a Paladin, your world was flipped entirely upside down. I was on my stream the other day talking about the old talent trees, and I threw them up on the screen and was talking about some stuff. I specifically remember rating as Retribution, right? I rated as Retribution spec in vanilla, but I was a healer because the 31-point talent for Ret was Blessing of Kings. And in Holy, the bulk of the talents that increased your healing power were at the top of the tree. So I remember being like 17 Holy or 20 Holy and having 31 Ret to get Blessing of Kings for the raid. By the way, 5-minute blessings. You didn't have greater blessings that healed the whole, or buffed the whole class. So that was brutal. People say like you spent your whole time buffing, right, as a paladin. And that wasn't always the case. It was the case a lot of the time. Some people are just, okay, might. Wisdom. It's not quite like that. You would get to the point where it's like, okay, that guy gets Blessing of Might. That guy gets Blessing of Kings. And you'd have a short list of people that you made sure were buffed. And then you'd basically be healing the whole time. So you would have a Retribution Paladin in your raids. It's funny. It was almost required to have a Ret Paladin in your raids before 1.9. It's like everybody says Rets can't raid, but just because of the logistics of it, right? The fact that they had Blessing of Kings, which is one of the best buffs in the game, 10% all stats. Made it to where you would bring you'd bring one Ret, right, to do that, and then he would just heal. But the way they reworked Ret Paladins reworked Paladins, was to kind of optimize the trees. Protection actually probably changed the least. Protection in the past was you had Repentance as the 31 point, which got moved to the 31 point for Retribution, kind of as more of a PvP talent. Right? So you could go, and this is what I was talking about when people said it was kind of a PvP nerf for Paladins. You could get Reckoning. You could get, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen the one-shot Kha'Zix with Reckoning. That got hotfixed like immediately after. That wasn't something that hung around. As soon as somebody actually did that, I don't think it was a bug. It was more of a design oversight. They didn't think anybody would be crazy enough to sit down and get crit for several hours before actually going to try and one-shot a world boss. But they did. So they hotfixed it, and they said, okay, we're going to make the cap 4. So 4 + 1, 5 total white hits. So you could get Reckoning, you could get Vengeance and Retribution, you could get Repentance, you could get Seal of Command, and you could put together a very powerful spec in that regard. But because there weren't any Ret Paladin DPS in raids, really, before the 1.9 patch, you didn't have access to... we were talking about Onslaught Girdle, Flame Guard Gauntlets. You didn't have access to all these great weapons and all this great gear that would make those specs absolute nightmares in PvP. So whenever they reworked them, Protection kind of stayed the same as a tanking spec. Retribution got buffed a little bit. They increased the proc rate on Seal of Command, and they reduced the damage to normalize it. But if you have more procs means potentially more crits, which increase Vengeance. I don't want to get too much into the specifics of Ret stuff. I'm going to make some more videos about that to talk about on my channel if you guys are really interested about that. But what is really, really, really interesting is Deep Holy was actually more of a damage spec than a healing spec. Because you had Sanctity Aura, which increases your holy damage by 10% as a 21 point. You have Divine Strength, which is at the top of the holy tree after the rework, which is a supplementary for Ret. And then Holy Shock didn't actually heal anybody; it only did damage. It was essentially like an Earth Shock or something for Paladins, which is pretty crazy.
Shocking.
Yeah. So the old Shockedin build, you would go Deep Holy and then a little bit in Ret to get Seal of Command. You had Sanctity Aura, you had Holy Shock, you had everything, right? So Shockedin got nerfed a little bit. Tri-Spec was another spec that got nerfed a little bit, and people have seen like some of the old Zul'Gurub videos and the quirky stuff, the kind of the meme stuff that the Paladins are known for. Some of that got nerfed and they got more optimized a little bit. But yeah, that was big. Yeah. And then of course, I just to clarify, whenever I was talking about the old blessings changed later on to add an additional spell called a Greater Blessing of whatever. And what the Greater Blessing did was a 15-minute buff that buffed the entire class, as opposed to just single buffing everybody. And the 15-minute buffs really aren't so bad. They eventually changed to an hour, I believe, in Burning Crusade. But the 15-minute buffs really aren't so bad. You use a Symbol of Kings, and it's easy. It's really not that bad. But 5-minute blessings is pretty brutal because it's singular. Singular and also 5 minutes, as opposed to a whole class 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
big changes for
basically
Paladins.
yeah. That was in a
Paladin
nutshell.
changes that patch in
In a
1.9.
nutshell. Yeah.
And then what else have they added? They add auction houses in every city in this patch. Of course, AQ opens. That's a huge, you know, crazy event that everyone has heard about in some way.
Yeah, I think.
And of course, you have to go through the war effort where your people in your faction are turning in supplies to NPCs. You have people farming, the materials for their Scarab Lord mount. By the way, there was no Scarab Lord title in Burning Crusade. You only got the mount. The title was added in Burning Crusade, in Vanilla. The title was added in Burning Crusade. It wasn't in Vanilla.
Yeah.
The mount was though.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of changes. What else have they done? This is when they upgrade the tier 2 stats and graphics. Tier 2, you guys can look up the old tier 2 models. They look really
terrible.
Crummy.
Terrible. We'll just say terrible.
Yeah. They're
horrible. They look like green items.
Greens, yeah. Greens, man.
Oh, you know what? Just because we're talking about the tier sets, the tier sets actually got 2 updates. They got updated in 1.6 as well. I believe they updated every single tier set in 1.6, and then again in 1.9. Not every tier set, but like Judgment. I believe Nemesis got updated. Stay safe. There were several of the tier sets that they got updated. They got some nice changes to them. It's funny actually. The Paladin set, the Judgment set prior was a straight up healing set. It was kind of similar to what the tier 3 set is. It's very well optimized for healing, and then it gets, and really more specifically PvP healing, but it gets changed to like a Shakadin kind of ret spell power set. It's kind of weird how the Judgment set changed. You could argue that it was a nerf for what you were getting it for initially, but yeah, something else you did mention. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say with Warlock Tier 1, when the game first came out, like the first couple patches before the 1.6 stat rework, a lot of the Warlock Tier 1 pieces had plus fire damage. And it's like, great, every boss or almost everything in Molten Core is immune to fire damage. Nice.
Yeah, no, total waste. Yeah. Man.
Yeah. And with AQ, they also revamped the raid calendar system. So if I'm not mistaken, back in the day when you would get saved to a raid, you were saved on your own individual lockout. So if you raided on Wednesday and Molten Core resets every 7 days, you can't enter Molten Core again until next Wednesday. But if somebody else in your guild raided it on Tuesday or Monday, they can't have access until next Monday. So it's kind of, everyone had their own individual lockouts, but that was standardized in patch 1.9, where everyone was on the same lockout date. Molten Core was 7 days, Blackwing Lair was 7 days, and Naxxramas was 5 days, and the 20-mans, I believe, were every 3 days. So a huge change there, honestly. People were already raiding pretty much at the same time, but for that fringe 10 or 20% that had to pug raids or do things in different times from their guild, that definitely affected them a lot.
Yeah. And speaking to that, I remember back in the day, people didn't really pug raids. Like that wasn't really a thing. I remember later on in Vanilla, they started pugging raids, and I do think that regulation of the raid reset times, it probably helped out to that a lot, because I mean, to me, that's a huge change. I think that's so important, because some people, for whatever reason, you might not have a guild, you might not have whatever, but towards the end of Vanilla, like you want to run some Molten Core, maybe you started late, whatever. Like I know I did some pug Molten Core for a while, and if you had to find out, hey, when was your reset? From week to week, there's no way you were going to be able to find a group of people that consistently were not already locked to another raid. So that was a massive, massive change that kind of helped out the community of the game, right? Trying to get involved with more people. Eventually, you pug raids with a certain amount, like with a certain group of people. You're like, hey, we're the same 20, 30 people in here. Well, why don't we try and make this thing a guild and try and recruit and all this stuff? So really, really good for the community of the game, the regulation of the raid reset times. I think that was really big.
And speaking of community, Stay Safe briefly mentioned it as well. The AQ War Effort event, potentially months long event where you had to collect all sorts of supplies and reagents and turn them in at faction NPCs before you could actually access the gates of Ahn'Qiraj. So I recently did a video on this. I figured I would mention it, but it was a huge event, and it's something we're going to be able to experience again in Classic, which is pretty damn awesome. But yeah, a server-wide collaborative effort, cross-faction, in order to be able to unlock the actual raid. Very, very cool.
I think it's one of the coolest things in the history of the game.
Yeah.
I think the opening of the gates is one of the just. I mean, you have to get now. I mean, you can. The Horde and Alliance hate each other, right? They do, but the fact that they have to, in essence, somewhat work together as far as like putting into the war effort to open up the gates. I don't know. I just think it's cool. Like everybody on the server is working towards the same thing. It kind of changes the atmosphere of the server a little bit. People are sitting there just turning in cloth nonstop, turning in copper ore. That's another cool thing about that event. It's not just thorium and rune cloth. It's a lot of the lower level stuff too. So now you're getting low level players involved in the livelihood of the server, which
Absolutely.
Unbelievable. From a design standpoint, I think that's so freaking cool because I could be Billy's level 17, whatever. I'm a level 17 hunter running around. And it's like, okay, I mean, I can't really do anything yet, but I mean, I can turn in some linen cloth to this thing, and I can help the war effort, and I can help the server out. And you're brand new to the game, you have no idea what's going on, but you feel a sense of belonging because you're making you literally are. It's not just like it's not placebo effect or whatever. Like you actually are making an impact from your linen cloth turn in or your wool cloth turn in to the war effort as a level 17 whatever. I think that's cool. I think that's a really, really good thing they did.
Or you might be level 23 hunter, right, or 17 hunter named Billy, right, and you have a level 60 guy in full tier 2 whispering you, hey dude, can I buy your linen cloth from you? You're like, whoa, that guy's a badass. Like, yeah dude.
Yeah, dude. Let me tell you a story. Actually, I had one time, and again, talking about kind of the how enchanting it is to see somebody like experience the game, just be a total noob, right? I had one time it was like a level 11 gnome mage, right? Female mage. No pink hair, but it was close, right? So gnome mage comes, messages me, and is like, hello, sir. Like, would you like to buy any Peace Bloom? And I'm just like, sitting there, I'm like, why would I want Peace Bloom, right? So, I'm a friendly guy, so I just, like, oh, no, thank you, though. And then it's like, okay, well, have a nice day. And then just walks off, right? And I was like, they were really friendly about it, but I totally broke this person's heart. And then I just messaged, I was like, how much Peace Bloom do you have? And they were like, oh, like, I don't know, 14 Peace Bloom or something. And I was like, actually, yeah, I do need that for something. I'll buy it. So they handed me, I just gave him 10 gold for 14 Peace Bloom just because I was like, I don't know, dude. It could have been some kid, it could have been whoever, but I was just like, man, I don't know. I'm just, what I really did that was not good, I set their expectation a little bit too high, so now they're going to try to put Peace Bloom auctions for gold each. So maybe I did a bad thing.
You got hustled, dude.
Yeah. No, but dude, I don't know. I felt like being kind, I guess.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. But it's stuff like that, dude. Like that, those interactions, like, you're not going to get that in the retail game. A level 11 whatever is going to come up to you and talk to you like that and just be like, hello, sir. Like, would you like this? Like, they could have easily, like, I mean, you get it all the time. Hey, can I have a gold to get my 10 silver ability? It's like, no, dude. Like, I don't know. It's just funny because, like, this person was actually, like, trying to sell and, like, make gold to do their stuff. And I was like, you know what? Here you go. But, it's just, I don't know. Stuff like that. That's the magic of vanilla. That's the magic of classic WoW. I don't know. Kind of went on a little bit of a nostalgia trip there, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you guys have anything else to add to 1.9?
I do want to talk a little bit about the auction houses because I see a lot of times, and if you look at the old patch notes and stuff, it says linked. It's always referred to as linked auction houses. So there's this thought that the auction houses in every city existed in the game from the beginning, and then that they link them up after 1.9 patch, but that's not true at all. And actually, they had auction houses in every city in the beta. Maybe it was the alpha, but pre-release, they had auction houses in every city, and they weren't utilized because you'd build a natural capital for your city based on where the content was and whatnot. And for the Alliance, that's Ironforge, whether that's the design of Ironforge or the fact that it's right next to Blackrock Mountain. That ends up becoming the natural capital. So the auction houses in Stormwind weren't really being used, and the auction houses in Darnassus definitely weren't being used, right? So they took those out of the game, and they left it that way. So what they noticed throughout time was that, you know what? Stormwind's kind of dead. Darnassus is really dead, right? So they added in the auction houses to the other cities at that point. We're not talking about the cross faction auction house, but the faction specific auction houses. And once they were implemented in the game and released, they were always linked. So whenever you see linked auction houses, it's more than anything just referring to the fact that they hadn't been linked pre-release. But whenever they were in the game post-release, they were always linked up. And I know that's something that like people talk about changes, right? People talk about changes, and all three of us, our general philosophy, we've talked about this before, is when you talk about changes, you need to really talk about changes within the scope of vanilla. And that's and again, kind of to hit on that again, that's kind of what we're talking about here. How was the game different? How much did vanilla WoW actually change throughout the scope of the game? Right?
Exactly.
So that's one of the things, like, should the auction houses be linked or not? That's one of the things I keep saying. I'm like, they were never not linked. They were always linked. And it would be really, really bad if they were not linked, because they took them out in pre-release for that exact reason. Nobody would use the other auction houses. So I just wanted to hit on that real quick, because I see it all the time, and I just wanted to help clear that up a little bit if I can.
Yeah. And we've actually forgot about the biggest change in patch 1.9, the biggest addition in this patch: Warlock soul shard bags.
Oh.
At this point, they add soul shard bags. Prior to that, you have to put all your soul shards in your 16 slot traveler's backpack. It was terrible, man. Now you can have a 20 slot. I think you can even get a 22 slot soul shard bag. Oh my goodness, it helps so much. You can put them in your bank. It's the best thing ever, man.
I could be selfish and say I don't care about that, but as a raider, you should very much care about if your warlocks have soul shards or not. That should be very, very important to you, because somebody's going to need a summon. We're talking about AQ. AQ is a massive, massive instance. You're going to have to summon people within that, because somebody's going to have to run back for something. Something's going to happen. Warlocks, get your soul shards. Thank you for soul shard bags, Blizzard. That was great.
Can we also agree that Ahn'Qiraj backpacks should be Warlock Prio, the 18 slot bag from Ahn'Qiraj?
Yeah, that I don't know. Right? That I don't know about.
Oh, man.
And just to clarify, soul shards are like reagents used by warlocks to cast certain abilities, for those that didn't play back in the day. So I think today on retail, it's like baseline. It's your actual resource that you use to cast spells. But back in vanilla, they were actually a physical item that you had to leech off of each mob you would kill and stockpile them up. So when you do go to a raid, you have all of these different soul shards stocked up, so you can cast all of your different spells. So that's why it was so important to release those bags, because otherwise you had like 30, 40, 50 slots that were just dead with soul shards. So
yeah, backspace at a premium for several classes.
Yeah,
for several ret tanks. All the ret paladins in your raid are going to be short on backspace. I'll tell you that much.
Hunters as well with the ammo too.
Yeah, that's good.
That leads us into patch 110, Storms of Azeroth.
Yeah, and
that's right.
Yeah.
Do one of you guys? I can start on 110. Because basically with 110, that's another catch-up patch. Oh, back to 1.9, 1 second. Talking about catch-up mechanics, AQ wasn't just a 40-man raid. There were two parts to AQ. There was the temple and then the ruins. And that's another catch-up mechanic that was added in 1.9. We talked about that a little bit with ZG, but they also added AQ20, which has very, very good gear. Actually, there's some gear in AQ20 that's better for certain classes than Blackwing Lair. Just like one specific piece here or there is better for certain classes, which is pretty cool. Like stuff like that is interesting, because what ends up happening is you have people who are already fully geared out wanting to go run those old instances for rep from ZG. AQ20 gives you Cenarian Circle and a little bit of Brood rep so that you can get your AQ40 tier pieces, right? Something that Blizzard did throughout the course of vanilla is they kept stuff that was in the game, or stuff that was in the game prior, having items that were really, really good. That wasn't English, but you guys get what I'm saying, right? They had they had items that were really, really good. Again, Onslaught Girdle was one. In ZG, you need the enchants. AQ20, there's certain pieces. But having those items there, or a chance to get a legendary, the Thunder Fury or Hand of Rag, you want to keep running MC. You want to keep running BWL. You want to keep running ZG, at least to a certain extent. Or having some sort of cosmetic item in there. ZG Tiger Mount, ZG Raptor Mount, right?
The Hakar Hearts for your world buff.
Hakar Hearts for world buff. So they leave reasons in there for people who already are at the top of their game to keep running that stuff to kind of help the other players who are new to the game get to go as well. And that's an incredibly good design philosophy for raids. I love that. Because if you look at Legion now,
I was going to say, if you're a competitive guild, you will have to clear every raid every week for all of vanilla WoW, pretty much, right?
To maximize, yeah.
Yeah.
And like if you look at Legion now, I'm not a mythic raider or anything like that. I've done like LFR and I've done some normals and stuff like that. But to me, how the game is now in WoW, it's like everything else that's not the top tier content is kind of goes to waste, right? I could be wrong about that. I could be wrong, but that's my personal experience with it.
No, you're right. It gets totally trivialized and left in the dust.
Exactly. And I think it's a misconception that a lot of people have. A lot of people say that the reason why Blizzard does what it does today with Legion or Warlords of Trade or post vanilla, the reason they want you to play the patch, not the expansion, is because people move ahead and people fall behind, and they want to be able to get everybody that's fallen behind right back up with everybody else. Well, the fact of the matter is, in vanilla, there was those incentives in the raids. You don't necessarily have to invalidate all of your previous content to keep people always running older content. Just put some small incentives in there. And not just the raids, the dungeons. I mean, you've got best in slot gear in Maradon that stays with you for some classes. You've got all of these items from all like areas of the game, certain reagents you can farm in certain zones. There's always a reason to go back and farm elemental earth in the world. There's always a reason to go back to all of these older zones. It's a philosophy, like Esfand said, it's a very brilliant philosophy. But at the same time, it's important to understand that the direction they took the game in was not necessarily required. I mean, people try to defend it, but the reality is they didn't necessarily have to do it that way. And it's a problem that's plagued WoW for, honestly, almost since vanilla. I'd say actually since Wrath of the Lich King. Yeah, you don't have to just play the patch. You can play the entire expansion, and there are ways to incentivize players to do so.
There's always something to do. That's the big thing with vanilla. And I guess now to actually get into 1.10, because I kind of kicked back a little bit there, but to actually get into 1.10, and again, more catch-up mechanics, they added tier 0.5, or as they called it, dungeon set 2, right? So what the dungeon set 2 tier 0.5 was they took those Magister set, they took the Lightforge set, Valor sets, and you could do a quest chain and get a set of gear out of it that the stat allocation on it, the itemization might be slightly different, right? It might be slightly different than what you saw in your tier set, or it might be slightly worse. I know for a paladin, it's kind of like a hybrid damage spell power suit, right? So for the sake of paladins, what they might have been thinking there is, well, a lot of retribution paladins might be solo players, or people might want to do this to get a ret set to PvP with after they changed ret to kind of, repentance was a 31 point. That's more of a PvP talent than a PvE talent. So they might have been thinking like that and adding Soulforge, the updated Lightforge, to be more centered around that. But then the other sets, right, the caster sets, now they add some plus damage, some of the stuff that we talked about earlier that they didn't have, right? That a player who's new to the game can go get their full tier 0, and then they can do a quest chain to upgrade all that to get the tier 0.5.
Yeah.
And to catch up.
The quest chain is actually, you're right, to catch up. The quest chain is a bit tedious, actually. I don't know if you guys have done it or looked into it. It actually takes a while, but like you mentioned, a lot of these sets, you got to earn it, definitely. A lot of these sets just had, stamina, spirit, strength on them or something like that. They didn't have melee crit or spell power or attack power. Now they've added those stats onto these, so it really helps a lot. Like tier 0.5, I'd have to double check. I think a lot of them might even be better than tier 1. Like they're very good.
Depending on your class.
They really are. Yeah,
depending on your class,
right?
Really, really good thing that they added in the game, because one, like you said, like you have to earn it, right? You have to earn it. It's something that you can do in your off time when you're not raiding. Add something to do for people who are more small group players, people who like to do 5-man, stuff like that, who might not be into the raiding, or they're looking at getting into the raiding and they need a suit to get them kickstarted on top of ZG, on top of AQ20. So now you've got tiers of content in the game that everybody's doing for different reasons, right? With the tier 0.5, you might have a player, like you might have a completionist type player which I know Stay Safe is one of the people that just wants to do everything in vanilla. I'm very much like that as well. And the idea is that like, okay, I can go get that suit for something else, right? As a paladin, right? I can go. That's just a different suit, right? I mean, people talk about hunters rolling on everything. Paladins are kind of the same way. let's be honest. Paladins want like every piece of gear to use it for a different spec or a different thing, and that's just the nature of being a hybrid. But the different classes can, or the different players can get the different gear for the different classes for different reasons. And I think that is really, really good because it keeps that content rolling, right? The content is being recycled in a sense, but it's still being run, right?
Yeah.
I think it's good stuff.
Yeah,
really good stuff.
I was going to mention that, you might be in full tier 2 or AQ best in slot, but that's still something to go do and collect. And it's something for you to have fun doing.
Mm-hmm.
Go collect your 0.5. It's actually kind of fun to get.
Yeah. And on top of that, like a lot of you might be thinking, well, we've already been playing the game for a certain amount of time. Why don't we just skip these tier sets or skip these catch-up rewards? Thing about vanilla is the frequency of drop rates from bosses are so low, especially for people who don't take the game to the maximum level of seriousness, that you're going to have a point where you've been raiding for maybe 4, 5, 6 months, and you still have that garbage, ring from wherever you got it.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you've been raiding for a long time, these upgrades, these itemization changes like tier 0.5, they're not always, but in a lot of cases, they're going to be interesting to you because even though you have gear from AQ 40 or wherever, you still might not have that 1 or 2 pieces, and these incremental upgrades could actually help you out. So there's always benefit to them no matter what, basically.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, you have a choice. You could, if you just don't want to do it, then you could not do it. If you do want to do it, then you do it. And that's one of the cool things. Like you don't feel, unless you're being chased by that, I want to be the best sort of mentality, right? If you got that behind you, then really you can do whatever you want, however you want to play the game, however you want to enjoy classic WoW, right?
Exactly. And 110 also brought with it a priest rework. Bunch of different changes to the talent tree. Obviously, you got your points refunded just like any other rework. But specifically in the discipline tree, there was no power infusion as a final talent. Instead, it was a spirit buff called Divine Spirit. So something to keep in mind. And in the holy tree, Lightwell did not exist prior to patch 110. It was not a talent. It used to be Holy Nova. So that got changed. Obviously, Lightwell was introduced. The Shadow tree stayed pretty much the same, but a lot of changes, a lot of small changes to heal in the different ranks of your standard heal. The duration was reduced a little bit. So a lot of different changes. But again, every single patch, there were other changes as well. Don't think of these reworks as the one time they addressed a class's issues. They addressed class issues in every single patch throughout the entire original game. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's big. I think that is big.
And then the last big thing they changed in this patch was they connected the flight paths.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before, if you wanted to fly from Darnassus to Ahn'Qiraj Crater, you'd have to sit there the entire time and click. You'd land in freaking Darkshore, and then you'd fly to Ashenville. You have to re-click Ashenville, then you got to fly down to Ratchet, or whichever the next one is. You can't just get on the flight path and go AFK. You have to stay. Getting on a flight path was an interactive experience.
It was a nightmare, is what it was. Yeah, because what happens? What were we talking about earlier? People ganking people at the flight masters. So you get off, somebody hits you right away. There you go. You're in combat. You can't get on the flight again. Then you're dead.
Yeah.
Not good. Not a good thing. But yeah, I think is that pretty much it for 1.10. I think we hit on the key points there.
Well, I don't think we said this is the Storms of Azeroth patch, patch 1.10. They add in weather effects.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So you have snowstorms, now you have rainstorms, stuff like that. It made it feel a lot more immersive and badass.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, they're constantly doing stuff to the game to kind of polish it, tweak it, get it going. Before they eventually decided to add it. Well, they didn't decide. They were planning that expansion for a long time. They were planning Burning Crusade for a long time. But until it eventually got to the expansion time, and then they had the big stuff. But yeah, that was cool. That was cool whenever they finally added weather effects to vanilla. In 1.11,
Dun dun
Naxxramas.
dun.
Yes, Nax. Big raid. Right? So Nax was released in 1.11, which is actually, everybody knows 1.12 is the last patch. We'll get to that. And that's the big dog. I believe it was about 25 guilds. About 25 guilds actually cleared Nax before Burning Crusade
Which
came
is
out.
weird because everyone I meet online has cleared Nax back in Vanilla WoW. It's
Well,
crazy.
and they were Grand Marshal, dude, and they were rank 14.
Right.
So yeah, I did not do Nax in vanilla. Definitely not. They also added Argent Dawn rep rewards. Basically, that part of the world, the Playlands, was popping because they had Argent Dawn rep rewards. People were trying to get their rep up to get attuned. AQ40 did not have an attunement. BWO had attunement, MC had an attunement, and then they brought the attunement back with Nax. I guess we should have mentioned that earlier. But the attunement was back with Nax. I believe you had to be at least revered with Argent Dawn to get in, and then there was also some pretty nice rep rewards that were added in with that patch as well. The thing with Nax, and we'll do a podcast sometime talking more specifically about raids, but just to touch on a little bit, Nax was added 6 months prior to Burning Crusade release, right? Mm-hmm. 6 months prior, and only 25 guilds cleared it, which should tell you how difficult that's going to be. I mean, you might have that guild that clears it on the first day or whatever because they've researched everything, they figured everything out, they're the best players on the server. Like, sure, you're likely to have that, but for the majority of the server, for the majority of the player base, I bet it's going to be a lot more of the same, because I do think people underestimate the difficulty of vanilla. I do think people underestimate that, tend to forget certain things, because it's not always about you. It's not always about, like, hey, stay safe. Like, do you know exactly everything about this fight? It's, hey, Tips, hey, stay safe, hey, Esfand, hey, whoever, 40 people. Do you guys all know what to do at every point of a certain fight? And that's what makes it so difficult. Right.
As well as the preparation, definitely.
As well as the preparation, exactly. So Nax is kind of the epitome of that.
Nax takes a ton of preparation. Consumables, whew, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can expect to raid if you're doing all the content in the game. You can expect to raid 7 days a week. At that point, if you're in the highest of end guilds, you're raiding probably 7 days a week, and then you're farming. Or
if not raiding, you're farming gold and materials and making consumables and. Yeah, it costs a lot of gold to raid competitively, especially by the time Nax is out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, big part of that, or a big thing with that is, well, you look at the separation, right? As the game content goes along, you start seeing guilds separate, right? Not necessarily break up. You do see that, but you start seeing the really good guilds stand out from the crowd more and more. And with each tier of gear that's added, with each raid that's added, there's a new level of power creep, right? And deservedly so, right? I think the gear in Nax is insane compared to AQ40, which is way better than BWO, which is better than MC, right? It's not quite exponential, but it's kind of got that going for it. But because there's so few people that cleared Nax, if you ask me, you deserve it, right?
Yeah.
So that was the big thing. You start seeing, like, Might of Menethil, Corrupted Ashbringer. I mean, you see some big guns being thrown around a little bit. But I know there was also Shaman rework. Tips, do you want to hit on that?
Yeah, so the Shaman or enhancement Shamans had actually two 30-point talents, which is pretty unique. I think only one other spec had that. I can't remember. But one of them was Improved Grace of Air Totem, which was actually brought back in TBC. It was a totem that added, I think, 3% extra agility baseline, and anticipation increased defense skill instead of dodge, whereas Resto Healing Way was added. So the way Healing Way worked, I believe, was every time a Resto Shaman would cast a spell and it would crit, the next spell or the next healing spell would do a certain amount extra healing. So it was like a progressively stacking buff. And yeah, I mean, Shamans, it's difficult to say a lot of things about them. They're definitely useful on the healing side, but enhancement Shamans, one of those specs that you're probably going to only see one or two of them in the raid at most. But still getting reworked. Again, it's patch 111. They've been toyed with, they've been messed with, they've been changed throughout this entire time, but they do get their rework finally towards the end of vanilla.
Mm-hmm. And
And
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say mages as well.
Yeah,
if you
there
want
you
to
go.
take it.
That's exactly what I was going to talk about. So with mages, right? With mages, and just to kind of preface this a little bit, if you look at the class design, right? You look at the design of the game, and I think I might have mentioned this a little while ago, but if you look at the design of the game, they based so much of the classes that they chose and what they want to do with the game. It's a lot of role play, but also off of Warcraft 3. Like, how does this class resonate with a Warcraft 3 player, right? Like, what combination of whatever is a mage? You know, if it's, you know, sorceress, archmage, whatever, right? So you have the mage class, which I think a lot of people would agree it's kind of one of the I would in the discussion for MVP class of vanilla, right? I think you could argue warrior as well, probably, you know, just because they do such good melee damage and they're the best tanks. But as far as mages go, CC, water and food, portals, they're a very accommodating class, right? Both for the player and for people playing with that mage in the group, right? And for that reason, and this might be the reason why they waited so long to change them, they did not have a whole lot of changes in their rework. All their major talent points stayed the same except for evocation. Evocation was moved to baseline, and they, looking at the talents, they kind of went through, you know, comparing the original talents to 1.11 talents for mages. They went through and they might have made some little things here and there a little bit easier as far as like mana regen is concerned, like mana conservation, right? Again, they made evocation baseline, so that may have been another big part of that. But as far as, you know, arcane power, you know, palm pyro, combustion, ice blot, all the major stuff with mages pretty much stayed the same, right? And you could say that maybe they just felt like that class was designed well, right?
Yeah, I think as far as influence, you mentioned Warcraft 3. As far as influence and things they took from Warcraft 3, they had a lot of stuff they could pull from that game.
Mm-hmm.
Mages were one of the most fleshed out classes even before they started World of Warcraft development, just because they had so much influence in Warcraft 3, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And even before, like drawing from Dungeons and Dragons and all sorts of like folklore, mages, wizards, sorcerers, whatever you want to call them, that archetype is very much a staple of the fantasy genre as a whole. And so
No
they were
doubt.
definitely, probably one of the easier classes to make, I would guess.
Yeah. And I think if you look at the original class design, like you have classes like, you know, Paladin, Shaman, which Tips just talked about, is a lot like that. If you look at the Shaman, so check this out. If you look at the Shaman in Warcraft 3, they don't have totems, right? So Shamans in vanilla are kind of like witch doctors and
Well,
shamans.
they carry them around, don't they? It's like their big two-hand weapon. Their big fat totem. But you're right,
Well-
they don't drop them on the ground.
Well, no, that was the Tauren
The
warriors. Yeah,
Yeah, that was the Tauren Warriors.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay.
yeah. So in Warcraft 3, like, I don't even think they were just called Tauren. Like, you would just craft Tauren. And they were basically just Tauren warriors that would swing totems. So like they kind of combined several elements to make a class, you know, based on what was in Warcraft 3. And I'm a brand new Warcraft 3 player. I've been streaming it to kind of get back to my roots a little bit, right? I've never played it before, so it's cool to see kind of the origin story of Warcraft or World of Warcraft, and I think that's been really cool. But yeah, I think with mages specifically, not a whole lot changed. They didn't really feel the need to change it. One of the things that did change, kind of quality of life change, is Arcane Explosion was made instant cast, as opposed to talenting into it in the arcane tree to make it instant cast. I believe that talent got changed to be increase the crit chance of Arcane Explosion, because I remember before, now I didn't play a mage personally, but almost every mage I knew, like, that was like a mandatory talent, was to make Arcane Explosion instant cast. So that was a pretty big deal for them to finally make that instant, as opposed to 1.5 second cast, I believe is what it was. Another big change, and Tips just talked about Priest a while ago. Power Infusion and Arcane Power used to stack prior to the 1.10 patch. In the 1.10 patch, Arcane Power and Power Infusion no longer stack. So Power Infusion, Arcane Power, Presence of Mind, Pyroblast, those are the big one-shot. Those are the big, berserking buff. Let's not forget berserking buff. So you see montages, old school like videos of just palm pyros. That's usually what's happening, where they're just flying around one-shotting people. 30% berserking. Arcane power is 35. Is that right? 35, and then power infusion is 20. I mean, it's insane, right? So that they were like, okay, that needs to not be a thing anymore. So they made those no longer stackable, and yeah, I'm trying to think what else did happen in 1.10 that we, or 1.11, excuse me.
Here's a big thing they did. They updated the honor sets.
Yes.
So up until now in Vanilla WoW, there was a blue level 58 honor set. This is the set you unlocked at rank 7, 8, and 10. And then there was the rank 12, 13, 14. Well, the 14 is the weapons, but the epic gear, the epic honor gear that you get from ranking up. So in this patch, they buff the epic gear to be more on par with Naxx gear. And they get rid of the 58 set that you got from rank 7, 8, and 10. And they add in a blue set that requires level 60 now. So completely new item IDs, same rank requirements, but it's a completely new set, and that is also to be more on par with Naxx gear. Of course, it's a little bit worse than Naxx gear and worse than the epic gear, but it's definitely better than the level 58 gear. So big ranking incentive, I guess. And then what else? Oh, they add in the respec cost decay,
which is big for PvP too.
Thing. Yeah. Exactly. It's big for everyone. You're gonna if you're doesn't matter what class you're playing, you're gonna have to respec a lot in Vanilla WoW, very likely.
Yeah, I know as a paladin. I was just gonna say, as a paladin, I know you, depending on how you play your paladin, you're probably not gonna get to ever see that decay, just because. And I don't want to cut you off, Stacey. If you want to keep going, explain the decay a little bit more. But yeah.
Well, yeah, it's just it's 5G decay per month, and it capped out at 50G. So if you respec a lot, you'll quickly get up to 50G respec cost, and that's where it'll stay, 50G every month. And I think this will, I don't know if it happens on a certain day or a month from your last respec. I'm not sure exactly, but per month it'll be 5G off of that cap. So you could drop from 50G down to 45G. Down to the minimum is 10G actually. So you could in theory drop down to 10G respecs if you just never respec.
You probably won't though. Realistically speaking.
Probably won't. Yeah, probably won't.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what the minimum is. I'd never experienced that. So I was constantly respecing, and it's crippling, honestly. Like, I mean, you're having a respec that, like, as somebody who raids and PvPs, even as a rep paladin, there's a different raid spec and a different PvP spec, okay? And that means you're basically 100 gold off the top if you want to play two different specs in and out of raid.
And 100 gold is a lot of gold. Like
a lot.
Like at bare minimum at level 60, unless you're a mage and you're farming Silithus, like that'll take you at least like 4 or 5 hours to farm, probably.
Yeah, maybe more even.
Yeah,
depends on how good you are at farming. But yeah, that was big. Oh, another thing that they changed in that patch was how you calculate how fear breaks. So they added diminishing returns in 1.4, but over time it's like, you know what? Fear is still it's still crazy, right? So before, how fear used to break, it used to check the base damage of the ability, like the damage that was being done to the target being feared, and then they changed it to calculate as the total damage that was received, right? So it kind of normalized it a little bit more, instead of just like, you know, I could hit a guy like 4 or 5 times maybe and fear doesn't break, as opposed to, or on the other hand, hit him once and fear breaks right away. So they kind of normalized it a little bit, and I don't know, I think that was probably for the best too. So
yeah, what that did was make it so dots were now breaking fear potentially, which it was a nerf to warlocks, whatever. But yeah, it was probably for the best.
Yeah. So from there, from the next patch, we go on to 1.12. And this is the patch that everybody refers to whenever you're talking about Vanilla WoW. Everybody talks about Vanilla WoW in the within 1.12, right? It's like, oh, in the 1.12 patch this, in the 1.12 patch that. What happened in the 1.12 patch is actually something kind of funny that a lot of people don't consider vanilla, but cross-realm battlegrounds which is on my short list of worst things ever added to the game, if you ask me, was added in 1.12. I hate cross-realm battlegrounds. Just pulling people from different servers. It kind of killed the community of the game, right? That was it not single-handedly, but it was one of the things that led into the killing of the community of the game and the server, right?
Yeah.
Before, and you guys can attest to this, when you're on a certain server, when you're on a specific server and you go into a battlegrounds, and I remember, I mean, this is, I played on Kel'Thuzad, and before Kel'Thuzad, I played on Illidan. I got a free transfer to Kel'Thuzad in late vanilla. But I remember there was a warrior named Piccolo on the Horde side. He's a Tauren warrior. I was an Alliance human paladin, right? But I remember I'd see Piccolo in the battlegrounds, and I'd be like, oh, frick. Like, I'm about to get frickin' smoked by Piccolo, right? You forget stuff like this happened, right, over time, because it's like, well, you know, I'm on a battle group now. You know, I know there's talks of like BG9 and Night. I mean, there's eventually got split into battle groups, and then now the current game, it's everybody is all together. If I'm right, that's what I believe, right?
Yeah.
So it hurt the single, like the rivalries and the stuff that went on from, you know, the top Horde guilds and the top Alliance guild, the top Alliance players, the top Horde players. I think it was huge, man. I'm big anti cross-realm BGs.
Same. I have a question for you though. Do you think that in today's environment, and this is not at all how it was back in 2005, 2006, do you think in today's environment, when you have community figures as big as like Soda Poppin', whatever server they're on is going, let's say he plays Horde, it's going to be 95% Horde players on that server, very likely. If you don't have cross-realm BGs, the ranking is going to be terrible on a server like that, don't you think? It might be necessary in the world of 2018 or 2019.
So I think stuff like that, and I do think you bring up a really good point, right? I think you bring up a really good point. I think stuff like that needs to be assessed down the road, right? I think whenever you release the game as is, you see, and that's what happened, man. That's what happened in 1.12, because it wasn't like this, and they were like, well, this server is 90% Alliance, this server is 80% Horde, and then they had to release cross-realm BGs because nobody could get into battlegrounds in some servers.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you hit on a really freaking good point, and that might be one of the unfortunate realities that we might have to face, is that they might have to implement cross-realm BGs. I hope that they would not initially, and they would test it out. But I don't know. I believe at one point, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they had population caps per server, or sorry, faction population caps per server. Is that right? Am I making that up?
I don't remember. Yeah, I'm not positive on that.
Okay, I remember at some point, like I've for whatever reason, I have this memory, and you know, I may be wrong on this. I might be crazy, but I remember trying to create a character on a server, and it said I can't create that faction for whatever reason, and it wasn't a PvP thing. Like, you know, you can't create Alliance and Horde on the same server. But I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering something.
It is a really interesting thought process to have. You have people that are advocating, you know, run off of 1.12 and have progressive content. Okay, so they're saying, you know, Blizzard knew best, and we want to run off 1.12 because Blizzard spent, you know, 2 years fleshing out the classes, and that's what was best for the game. We want balanced classes. So that was what Blizzard realized. They need to have these better balanced classes. But Blizzard also realized by then that they needed cross-realm BGs to, you know, it's like, it's sort of having it both ways, don't you think?
I definitely have a theory. I have a theory that every single change Blizzard has made to the game was in response to something being broken. They didn't just pull changes. I mean, for the most part, at least definitely in vanilla, there were things that were broken and they addressed them. Now, sometimes the solution isn't always the best solution to the problem, or it can break many other things that weren't foreseen at the time. So an example of cross-realm BGs, it's definitely one way to fix a big problem, and that's faction imbalance. Another way might be to, and they did this back in vanilla a little bit, but to give out free server transfers to servers that are like this, to incentivize people leaving big realms for smaller realms. There are a lot of things you can do that are Blizz-like. I mean, this is something they did. They just didn't do it as frequently. And I think probably to combat the overhead that was involved in setting up these server transfers, they ended up going with the cross-realm BG system. But it's one of those things where, I know like the big streamers are going to attract these crazy audiences to a single faction. That was kind of the case back then. It wasn't driven by streamers, but servers did have certain reputations. Oh, I want to play on this server because they're so good and they've got all the world firsts or the region firsts. So there was definitely forces that were driving players to roll a specific faction on a specific server. It's probably just going to be one of those things, as you said, play it by ear, see what the response is. And we also live in a day and age, I think, where gamers are a little bit more savvy than they were back in the day. If they recognize that they're not getting the BG popping, they're, maybe they just switch servers. Who knows? I mean, it's definitely something you have to play by ear.
Yeah, no doubt. One more thing, and this is the final rework. If you even want to call it a rework, because I mean, I've looked at it myself. There is not a whole lot that changed with rogues. I mean, maybe this is why they waited till 1.12, right? This was outside of cross-realm BGs. This was a very light patch, really, and it was technically the rogue rework patch, and they changed very, very, very little. They went into the talent trees and. Or I went through the talent trees and kind of looked at everything, and they, for the most part, they optimized certain things. Like they changed improved kidney shot a little bit, but overall, rogues are, like I said earlier on, they're such a good class from the beginning design that there wasn't really a whole lot to change. I believe they slightly changed how hemorrhage works, how you get that in the talent tree as well. But overall, like the shape of the talent tree did not really change much. They're just they're a good class, but it's funny because again we're talking about class design and everything else, and how where do mages come from, where do shamans come from. Rogues, there's not really a rogue in Warcraft 3. There's not like a rogue character, so, or at least a creatable unit, right? That's a rogue. So they kind of took that and like Tips was saying earlier, the D&D, the other RPG kind of archetypes, rogue and even warrior a little bit, like you have Magni and you have Cairn and you have these warrior classes and warrior heroes in Warcraft 3, but you kind of take the tank philosophy and stuff like that from warriors from other RPGs, and the rogue is kind of the same way for stealthers, right? And maybe I personally think that's probably why they waited till the very end to really touch on them, because I couldn't find much of anything that was changed significantly with them.
Yeah, you're right. There weren't many rogue changes. There is another big change that happened in this patch, though. It's actually 1.12.1. They reworked the mount system. Yeah. So before you had to have Kodo riding, you had to have wolf riding, you had to have raptor riding. It was an individual riding skill you had to buy and train for each of these different types of mounts. Now they standardize it into, what is it, apprentice and journeyman riding skills.
Yeah.
And they decrease the cost of the mounts themselves and put the expense more in the training. Yeah. Whereas before, the training to ride raptors was cheap, but buying the raptor was expensive.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. And that's,
yeah,
it's funny. So the way it was before, right? People, this is kind of the first the first step in people collecting mounts, right? It came in vanilla, the first step of the mount collection thing, because now you could get the mounts for cheaper, and you just had to pay a big fee one time for the training, which should have, I mean, honestly, that should have been the way from the beginning. I don't know how. Yeah, weird thing. Really weird thing.
It's funny you mentioned the collecting different mounts. I'm reading the patch notes right here. They say this helps give players access to more variety without requiring a large monetary investment if they, for instance, just want to pick a different colored horse. That's in the patch notes.
There you go.
So there, if you want a different colored mount, now you can get it.
There you go. So
casual game.
Yeah, casual game, dude. Vanilla WoW, casual game. But here it is, right? We haven't gone through the all the very minute details, but this is a brief overview of every single patch and some of the big things that changed within those patches. We talk about starting in 1.1. We talk about starting in 1.12. We talk about crazy Franken patch or whatever they want to do. With that being said, Tips, what do you think? What do you think we should go with?
Well, I think driving back to some of the things we mentioned regarding itemization and class balancing, it's very apparent to me after reading these notes that classes were changed so drastically throughout vanilla, and that there were some things so glaringly broken that the best way to implement class design in vanilla is to go with 1.12.1, the final balance patch in the game. Now, that's just for classes. At the same time, you can't take 1.12.1 wholesale, because then you'll have the issues of itemization trivializing previous content, which is another really big problem. And obviously, the problem of consuming all of the content much quicker than it was released. So, in that regard, I think you should have 1.1 to 1.12.1 content progression. And then in between both of these two paradigms, there are a lot of small things that were changed here and there, flight points, etc. A lot of those things have to be taken or examined on a case by case basis in order to construct your final, what's been called Franken patch. And the way I look at it right now, anything aside from a Franken patch to adopt one philosophy over the other wholesale is destructive to the game. There are just certain things that lasted for so long that were so bad for the game that now that they've changed is a blessing in and of itself. And I don't like to talk about certain things in this podcast, but I think it's very important to learn from the lesson of unofficial realms, especially one in particular. Naxxramas, one of the reasons why they were so popular is that they understood you could not take 1.1, and they understood you could not take 1.12.1 wholesale. They mixed and matched the patches. They took the balance from 1.12.1 and they took the progressive release from 1.1. And that's kind of what helped them create what was arguably the most successful private realm in the history of Warcraft or across all video games. So that is the example that I think we should take.
Okay. And stay safe. What do you think we should do?
Oh, gee, what a tough question. Well, I'm a vanilla WoW fundamentalist, okay? I'm a vanilla WoW evangelical, I guess you could say. I want 1.1, then 1.2, then 1.3, all the way. I want an actual vanilla WoW release timeline as it was from 2004 to 2007. That's what I want. The dream. The dream.
So this is including like diminishing returns and stuff like that being added in 1.4 as opposed to from the beginning?
All of that. I want DRs added no sooner than five or 6 months. I want to have to click every individual flight path. I want all of that. Yep, exactly. And you mentioned the undocumented realm, Naxxramas. Who knows? They could have been more successful if they had run off of 1.1. They didn't have the capacity to do so. Private realms don't have the they don't have the build to run off 1.1 or 1.2. All that's available is 1.12.1. That's all they can work with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to say regarding that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. For me personally, right? I just want to play the game. Okay, ball is life. Life is ball. Give me 1.1 and I'll figure it out. Give me 1.12, I'll figure it out. I've done it before. I'll do it again. And to me, I do like what you're saying, Stay Safe, about the very unique experience of getting to experience that one more time, right? From 1.1 to 1.12, with the gaming experience just being older, being more knowledgeable as a 26-year-old as opposed to a 13-year-old, right? If I knew everything I knew about Paladins now that I knew in November 2004, I would have played the game quite differently, right? And I think a lot of people feel the same way. So I really like that idea behind 1.1. Is it going to change how I play the game compared to how you guys have seen me play the game? It might a little bit, right? I might be a little bit more PvP centric in the stuff that I do. Now, if we start with 1.12 and, you know, I have the tools at my disposal. And again, I'm thinking from this perspective of Paladin. This is the common man's perspective, okay? This is me thinking about my class and how I'm going to experience the game. I have that experience, right? And I'm good at that. So there's a sense of comfort there, and I know that it works, right? So for me, I don't care. Give me the game. I'll figure it out. I will figure it out. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And what I think we would like to know is what you guys think watching at home. Put it in the comments below what you guys think you would rather see. Early patch, late patch, and also let us know what else you'd like to hear us talk about here on ClassiCast.
All right, yeah, or a custom patch, right? A custom patch
Custom
as well.
patch as well.
Yeah, you could have classic WoW patch 1.0, the best of vanilla WoW or something like that. Who knows what they could come up with. Blizzard could be analyzing the game right now and decide, hey, you know what we think? We think patch 1.7 was the best version of vanilla WoW, and we're going to tweak a few things with that, and we're going to launch with that. Who knows?
Maybe.
Don't listen to these miscreants, ladies and gentlemen. 1.12.1 with progressive release, please. Just kidding.
We'd like to hear your
guys,
opinion.
Yeah, please let us know in the comments below. Are we going to wrap it up, guys?
I think so.
I think we're good.
And we're going to call it a day.
All right, thank you for watching, everyone. That was ClassiCast Episode 3. Let us know what you want in Episode 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Let us know what you want.
We'll see you guys next time.
Take it easy.